There is a white ring running around the walls of Lake Mead. It looks like a bathtub that hasn't been cleaned in years. Pale mineral deposits baked into the rock by decades of sun, marking the waterline of a lake that used to reach much higher than it does today.
Nevada will once again get even less water from the Colorado River.
Tier 1 water shortage on the nation's largest reservoir, Lake Mead, today.
From above, it reads like a scar. On the ground, standing at the shoreline, it reads like a warning. Lake Mead is the largest reservoir in the United States. It was full in 1983. It has not been full since.
The experts say it would take years of winters like this one just to begin to replenish what's been lost. I mean, this reservoir is like a bank account.
Since 2000, the water level has dropped by roughly 160 feet. The lake that once held 26 million acre-feet of water, enough to cover the entire state of Pennsylvania in a foot of water, currently holds about 8.3 million. 30% of capacity, 25 million people depend on it for water. Las Vegas draws 90% of everything that comes out of its taps from this lake. The farms of Arizona and California draw from the same source. So does a significant portion of northern Mexico. Hoover Dam, which created this lake in 1936, generates electricity for homes and businesses across Nevada, Arizona, and California. As the water has dropped, so has its output, by roughly a third since the lake was last healthy, and the lake is still dropping. At the bottom of this reservoir, there is a threshold called Deadpool. At 895 feet above sea level, the water falls too low to pass through the dam. No flow downstream, no hydropower. For the cities and farms that have built entire water systems around what comes out the other side of Hoover Dam, Deadpool is not an engineering term. It is an existential one. Las Vegas saw this coming. 20 years ago, the city made a $1.5 billion bet that the lake would keep falling, and built the infrastructure to survive it. That infrastructure is running right now today, as the lake sits at levels it has not seen since the 1930s. This is the story of how the Colorado River reached this point, what Deadpool actually means for the American Southwest, and the engineering project that is keeping one desert city alive while the water disappears around it. To understand what's at stake, you have to start with what was built here in the first place. In 1931, the United States was in the depths of the Great Depression. 1 in 4 Americans was out of work. Banks were failing. The economy had collapsed so completely that the federal government was desperate for projects large enough to put significant numbers of people back to work. What it ultimately chose to build in the Nevada desert was audacious, a mega project that was about to change lives of millions, but one that engineers at the time weren't entirely sure it could be done. The Colorado River had been flooding and destroying communities across the Southwest for decades. It was unpredictable, violent in spring, nearly dry in summer, and completely unmanageable at industrial scale. The Bureau of Reclamation had been studying a dam site in Black Canyon on the Nevada-Arizona border since the early 1920s. The project that emerged from those studies was the Hoover Dam, and it was unlike anything previously attempted in the United States. Construction began in 1931. At peak activity, more than 5,000 workers were on site and working in canyon temperatures that regularly exceeded 120 degrees Fahrenheit. They lived in a purpose-built town called Boulder City, constructed from scratch in the desert to house the workforce. Over 5 years, they poured 3.25 million cubic yards of concrete, enough to build a 2-lane highway from New York to San Francisco. When the dam was completed in 1936, it was the largest concrete structure ever built, 726 feet tall, 1,244 feet wide at the crest, holding back a reservoir stretching 112 miles into the Nevada and Arizona desert. That reservoir is Lake Mead. At full capacity, Lake Mead holds 26.1 million acre-feet of water. That is roughly 326,000 gallons. Multiplied out, the lake at full pool contains just under 9 trillion gallons. enough to supply every household in the United States for approximately 13 years. The scale of what Hoover Dam made possible is difficult to overstate. Before it existed, the Colorado River was a seasonal problem. After it, the river became the water supply for one of the fastest-growing regions in the country. Phoenix, Tucson, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, San Diego, cities that would have been impossible to sustain at their current size without the water and power that flows from this structure. Hoover Dam generates power by funneling water from Lake Mead through turbines before releasing it downstream. At full reservoir levels, it produces around 4 billion kilowatt hours per year, enough to power more than 1 million homes continuously. That electricity is divided across 3 states, 55% to California, 25% to Nevada, and 20% to Arizona. The transmission lines running out of Black Canyon reach communities hundreds of miles away. But it wasn't just about the numbers. The dam also created something beyond infrastructure. It became a symbol, built during the Depression by workers earning 50 cents an hour, in conditions that killed 96 of them. It represented what American engineering and American labor could accomplish in the most testing of times. Franklin Roosevelt called it a 20th century marvel, and it was an instant hit. It drew tourists from the day it opened, and to this day, roughly 1 million annual visitors stand on its crest and look down at the canyon below. However, for the communities that depend on it, Hoover Dam is not a tourist attraction. It is the reason they exist where they do. Las Vegas sits 30 miles to the northwest. In 1936, when the dam was completed, Las Vegas had a population of around 8,000 people. Today, it has 2.2 million in the metropolitan area. That growth happened because water and power were available reliably from the structure in Black Canyon. The city draws 90% of its municipal water supply directly from Lake Mead through a system of intakes and pumping stations built into the reservoir's walls. Without the lake, Las Vegas does not function. The same dependency, at different scales, runs across the entire Southwest. The Colorado River system supplies water to roughly 40 million people across 7 states, tribal lands, and parts of northern Mexico. The farms of Arizona's Yuma Valley, which produce the majority of America's winter vegetables, are irrigated with Colorado River water. The cities of Southern California receive a significant portion of their supply through the same system. All of it originates upstream and passes through, or is stored by, the infrastructure that Hoover Dam anchors. For the first several decades of its operation, the system worked as designed. The lake filled, the turbines ran, and the Southwest grew around the assumption that this supply was reliable, permanent, and effectively limitless. The lake was last full in 1983. In the 4 decades since, it has been on a trajectory that the people who built Hoover Dam never anticipated, and that the communities depending on it spent a long time not wanting to acknowledge. The Colorado River, it turns out, was never as reliable as the 20th century made it appear. And while the whole system worked beautifully for decades, the foundations for a future disaster were laid from the start. On November 24, 1922, representatives from 7 states gathered at the Palace of the Governors in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and signed an agreement dividing the Colorado River between them. The Colorado River Compact allocated 7.5 million acre-feet of water per year to the upper basin states that included Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico, and 7.5 million to the lower basin states of Arizona, Nevada, and California. A separate treaty gave Mexico 1.5 million acre-feet annually. In total, the agreement promised 16.5 million acre-feet of Colorado River water every year, in perpetuity, to the people drawing from it. However, these negotiations were based on river flow data from 1906 to 1929, which was one of the wettest periods in Colorado's recorded history. The delegates measured the river during an anomaly and treated it as a baseline. The actual long-term average flow of the Colorado River, measured across 3 centuries of data, is approximately 13.5 million acre-feet per year. What was divided between states was not what the river delivered over centuries, and in recent decades, it has delivered considerably less. Since 2000, the river's average annual flow has been around 12 million acre-feet. The states, tribal nations, and Mexico drawing from it have legal rights to 16.5 million. Every year, roughly a quarter of promised water simply does not exist. That gap has to come from somewhere. For the past 2 decades, it has been coming from Lake Mead. The lake has been covering the shortfall by drawing down its own storage. And the storage has been running out. The decline started gradually. In 2000, Lake Mead sat at roughly 1,200 feet above sea level, near its historical peak. By 2004, it had dropped below 1,150. By 2010, it was below 1,100. Each dry year took a little more. Each wet year recovered a little less than was lost. The trend was unmistakable, and it was moving in one direction. By 2016, the lake had fallen below 1,080 feet, triggering the first formal shortage warnings from federal water managers. By 2021, it crossed 1,075, the threshold at which the Bureau of Reclamation declares a Tier 1 shortage, triggering mandatory cuts to water allocations for Arizona, Nevada, and Mexico. Arizona, the state with the most junior water rights in the lower basin, absorbed the largest cuts. Farms that had been irrigating with Colorado River water for generations were told their allocations were being reduced. In 2022, the lake hit 1,041 feet, its lowest level since it was first filled in the 1930s. Boat ramps that had operated for decades sat stranded on dry land, hundreds of feet from the waterline. Marinas closed. The pale mineral bathtub ring visible in satellite images stretched 160 feet above the surface. Objects that had been submerged for decades began reappearing. A World War II-era landing craft, sunken houseboats, a body in a barrel. The drought driving this had been building for more than 20 years. Scientists studying tree rings and other climate proxies have concluded the current dry period is the most severe in at least 1,200 years. The term used in official reports is mega-drought. It is not a temporary weather event that will resolve in a season or two. It is a fundamental shift in the region's hydrology, accelerated by rising temperatures that increase evaporation from the lake surface, dry out soils faster, and reduce the snowpack in the Rocky Mountains that feeds the river each spring. Colorado River flows this century have been 30% less than the flows recorded during the period when the 1922 compact allocations were set. The agreement was signed anyway because the alternative, 7 states failing to reach a deal, would have blocked the construction of Hoover Dam entirely. The compact was the price of the dam, and the dam was worth it for decades. But the accounting deferred in 1922 is now coming due. Climate change has added another layer to a problem that existed before it. Higher temperatures across the Colorado River Basin mean more water evaporates from the lake surface and from the soil before it can reach the river. Scientists estimate that roughly half of the decline in river flows since 2000 is attributable to rising temperatures. The other half is natural variability, drought cycles that the Southwest has always experienced, now amplified and extended by a warmer baseline. The 7 states that depend on the Colorado River have been negotiating how to respond since the shortage declarations began. Progress has been slow. The upper basin states, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, New Mexico, argue that they already use less than their allocated amounts and should not face mandatory cuts. The lower basin states of Arizona, California, and Nevada argue that the upper basin needs to release more water downstream. Each state's negotiating position is shaped by the legal rights it holds under the law of the river, a collection of compacts, court decisions, and federal statutes built on top of the 1922 foundation. The current management guidelines, which established the shortage tier system, were set in 2007 and extended through interim agreements. They expire at the end of 2026. The 7 states were supposed to have a new long-term agreement in place by February 2026. They missed that deadline. As of spring 2026, they remain at an impasse, negotiating over a river that is delivering less water every year to a legal framework that was built for a river delivering considerably more. Lake Mead is currently sitting at roughly 1,055 feet above sea level, 30% of capacity. The Bureau of Reclamation projects it could fall to 1,021 feet by summer 2027, lower than the record set in 2022. We are moving into disaster territory now. Lake Mead has dropped 160 feet this century, more of that, and it will reach the Deadpool threshold. But the power issues begin way before that. To understand the Deadpool and the power thresholds, let's have a look at the Bureau of Reclamation's official shortage tiers. Lake Mead is managed through a tiered system of water shortages. Each tier represents a point at which the Bureau of Reclamation has determined the reservoir can no longer support full allocations to the states drawing from it. At 1,075 feet, the Bureau declares a formal Tier 1 water shortage. At this point, Arizona loses 512,000 acre-feet from its annual Colorado River allocation, an 18% cut from its standard allotment. Nevada loses 21,000 acre-feet, while Mexico loses 41,000. The lake has been below 1,075 feet since 2020 and is now close enough to breaching a second level. At 1,050 feet, Arizona's cuts deepen another 15%, and the same goes for Nevada. Tier 3 shortage occurs at 1,035 feet. It is the most critical threshold for power infrastructure because once the lake drops below it, 12 of the Hoover Dam's 17 turbines cannot operate. It will cause an immediate 70% cut in hydroelectric power generating capacity, devastating households across the basin. Once it goes below the 1,000-foot elevation, the whole Colorado River infrastructure will be at risk of a system crash. But these tiers only redistribute scarcity. They do not create water, and that's what the lake is continuously losing. Below the shortage tiers lie two thresholds of a different category entirely. At 950 feet, Lake Mead reaches the minimum power pool. Once here, the water surface will be too low to reach Hoover Dam's turbine intakes. The 4 billion kilowatt-hours per year flowing out of Black Canyon will stop, and at the bottomies, Deadpool, a tier reached when the lake falls below 895 feet. Below this level, water falls too low to pass through Hoover Dam's outlet works by gravity. The dam will no longer release water downstream, and the Colorado River will stop receiving its supply. For the cities, farms, tribal communities, and the 40 million people whose water systems were built around the assumption that this river delivers, Deadpool is the end. The lake is currently 160 feet above Deadpool, and while it may seem like there's still time, let's not forget that in 2000 it was 330 feet above it. It has covered half that distance in 25 years. The trajectory is not moving in the right direction, and the forces driving it, reduced river flows, rising temperatures, a legal framework allocating more water than the river delivers, have not been resolved. There is one more detail about the dam's engineering worth understanding here. Hoover Dam's intake towers were designed in the 1930s to draw water from fixed depths in the reservoir. As the lake has fallen, those intakes have become less effective. In 2022, for example, the uppermost intake on the Nevada side was briefly exposed above the waterline entirely. The dam is physically constrained by where its pipes sit, independent of what any shortage tier specifies about allocations. The legal framework was written when the lake was full, and the designers had not anticipated the conditions that infrastructure would be operating in 100 years in the future. So, in a race against time, the authorities tried to change that. The negotiations between the 7 basin states have been running in various forms for more than a decade, and in 2026, they ran out of time. The Colorado River system is fed from the top down. Snow falls in the Rocky Mountains through winter. It melts in spring. The runoff flows into the upper river, fills Lake Powell behind Glen Canyon Dam in northern Arizona, and from there gets released downstream into Lake Mead. That cycle, snow, melt, flow, fill, is what keeps both reservoirs alive. In the winter of 2025 into 2026, the snowpack in the Rockies came in at record lows. A heat wave in March arrived before the snow had properly melted, burning off what little runoff the mountains had left to give. Lake Powell dropped faster than any projection had anticipated. Glen Canyon Dam, like Hoover Dam, generates power only when the water behind it sits above a minimum threshold. With Powell falling rapidly, the Department of the Interior faced a decision. It could maintain normal releases downstream into Lake Mead, keeping Hoover Dam's inputs stable. Or it could hold water back in Powell to protect Glen Canyon's power generation, accepting that less would reach Mead. In April 2026, it chose to protect Powell. The release into Lake Mead was cut by 1.48 million acre-feet for the year. The Bureau of Reclamation acknowledged the decision could accelerate the downstream decline of Lake Mead, including a potential 40% reduction to Hoover Dam's hydropower generating capacity as early as this fall. Hoover's output had already fallen by a third over the past 2 decades. A further 40% cut would leave the dam generating roughly a quarter of what it produced when the lake was healthy. In May 2026, the Bureau released a 24-month study projecting Lake Mead could fall to 1,021 feet by summer 2027, shattering the 2022 record low by more than 20 feet. The people feeling this most immediately are on the farms in Arizona, where the agricultural sector has been absorbing Colorado River cuts since the shortage declarations began. The Central Arizona Project, a 336-mile canal that moves Colorado River water to Phoenix, Tucson, and the farms of Central Arizona, has been delivering reduced allocations for years. Fourth-generation farmers are watching water they have irrigated with for decades disappear in increments. Some have faced curtailment of their surface water supplies entirely. Fields that grew cotton, alfalfa, and winter vegetables are being left unplanted. The communities built around those farms are shrinking with them. California, meanwhile, has faced no mandatory cuts. The compact promises California 4.4 million acre-feet annually, rights protected by seniority until the lake drops to a threshold that has not yet been reached. When it does, the legal fight over California's share will dwarf every water dispute the West has seen before it. The 7 states were supposed to have a new long-term management framework agreed by February 2026, replacing the interim guidelines that expire at the end of the year. They missed that deadline. In May, Arizona, California, and Nevada put forward a joint proposal to leave more water in the system through 2028. The Upper Basin states did not sign on it. The details of how cuts would fall hadn't been worked out, and nothing concrete has come up so far. The interim guidelines expire in December, and this has been a recurring event. Every short-term extension the states have negotiated over the past 2 decades has bought time without closing the gap between what the river delivers and what the agreements built on top of it promise. The lake has dropped through each of those extensions. The margin for another one is narrower than it has ever been. Las Vegas has been watching this trajectory for 20 years. And unlike every other city drawing from Lake Mead, it decided at some point that waiting for the states to agree was not a plan it could afford to rely on. So towards the end of the previous century, Vegas started working on a solution that is arguably the most important Vegas megaproject in history. When people think about what's draining Lake Mead, Las Vegas is usually the first thing that comes to mind. The Strip, the fountains, the hotels running 24 hours a day, the golf courses carved into the desert. It seems obvious, a city built on spectacle in the middle of the Mojave, drawing from a shrinking reservoir. Las Vegas must be a significant part of the problem. However, southern Nevada's entire annual allocation from the Colorado River is 300,000 acre-feet. Arizona receives 8 times that, while California receives 13 times more. Agriculture across the Southwest consumes roughly 70% of all Colorado River water. Las Vegas accounts for a fraction of what a single farming region draws in a year. On top of that, the city built on excess is one of the most water-efficient large urban systems in North America. And for the past 2 decades, while the negotiations between states stalled and the lake kept falling, it has been spending heavily to stay that way. The first part of that effort was conservation. Nevada and Vegas, in particular, had a problem with decorative grass. It required constant irrigation, evaporates water that can never be recovered, and existed in Las Vegas almost entirely for aesthetic reasons. So Nevada paid homeowners $3 for every square foot of decorative grass removed and replaced with desert landscaping. 250 million square feet have been removed since 1999, saving 203 billion gallons of water. The work is almost done, and by 2027, all non-functional grass in the city will be banned from using Colorado River water entirely. Using water conservation measures, between 2002 and 2024, Southern Nevada reduced per capita water use by 55%, while adding 829,000 residents. So while the metropolitan area grew by nearly 1 million people, they used less total water than before they arrived. The second part is recycling. Nearly all of the water Las Vegas uses indoors is treated and returned to Lake Mead. The city receives credit for every gallon sent back, meaning indoor use is effectively recycled rather than lost. Gross withdrawals from Lake Mead run close to 600,000 acre-feet per year, but net consumption stays at the 300,000 acre-feet allocation limit. Half of everything drawn comes back. The biggest piece of Nevada's effort was new water infrastructure, and that's where the real money went. More than $1.5 billion of it. Las Vegas had 2 intake pipes drawing water from Lake Mead. Both were built when the reservoir was reliably full, engineered for a lake nobody expected to fall as far as it has. As the water level dropped through the 2000s, the Water Authority's engineers reached a straightforward conclusion. At some point, the existing intakes would rise above the waterline. So in 2005, the board approved a third intake. The board set aside $812 million for it, and construction began in 2008. A 24-foot diameter tunnel boring machine excavated a tunnel under the lake bed and connected it to an intake structure secured to the bottom with more than 1,000 truckloads of concrete. The tunnel ran 4.7 kilometers through the alternating layers of hard rock, fault zones, and sections saturated with lake water from above. The crews working inside it were doing so beneath an active reservoir in rock that shifted and flooded without warning. Tunneling took place from 2011 to 2014. The intake structure lowered to the lake floor weighs over 1,200 tons. Among tunneling engineers, it was considered one of the most technically demanding projects completed anywhere in the world that decade. The project won engineering awards from organizations in the United States, Switzerland, and Britain. Intake number 3 began operating in September 2015. It reached deeper than the existing pipes, but still shared pumping infrastructure with them, limiting operation to water levels above 1,000 feet. So the Water Authority built a dedicated pumping station to go further. The low lake level pumping station was completed in 2020 and activated in April 2022 when the falling lake rendered one of the original pumping stations inoperable. It came in under its $650 million budget at $522 million and can deliver up to 900 million gallons a day. Together, the third intake and the pumping station reach water at 875 feet above sea level, 20 feet below Deadpool. If Lake Mead falls to the point where Hoover Dam can no longer release water downstream, where Arizona, California, and Mexico lose their supply, Las Vegas can still draw from the lake. The total cost of the intake system ran to roughly $1.5 billion. It is the most direct answer any city drawing from Lake Mead has given to the question of what happens when the water keeps falling. The fourth part is underground storage. Through artificial recharge programs, Southern Nevada has been injecting treated water into local aquifers for years. The Water Authority has stored more than 2.2 million acre-feet through water banking efforts in Nevada, Arizona, California, and in Lake Mead itself, a reserve that can be drawn on when the lake drops fastest or allocations are cut deepest. Las Vegas has done more to prepare for a shrinking lake than any other city drawing from it. The conservation gains are great, the recycling system is working, and the third intake reaches below Deadpool. However, none of it makes the Colorado River deliver more water than it carries. So the question is, what happens when the lake falls past the point that even preparation can reach? Despite all these measures, Lake Mead remains around 1/3 full, and the broader Colorado River system continues to face pressure from drought, climate change, and decades of overallocation. On May 21, 2026, the Bureau of Reclamation announced it was spending $52 million on Hoover Dam. The money was going toward 3 new turbines to solve the power generation problem. The existing turbines at Hoover Dam cannot generate enough power below 1,035 feet. If the lake drops below that level, generating capacity falls from over 1,300 megawatts to 382 megawatts. So the old turbines are being replaced with wide-head turbines that can operate down to 950 feet, which is the minimum power pool threshold. The new turbines are designed to keep the dam running through conditions the original engineers never planned for. The Las Vegas third intake reaches below Deadpool. The new turbines will keep the dam generating through conditions that would have shut down the old ones. Both are engineering responses to a lake that keeps falling. However, neither of them is a response to why it keeps falling. The cities downstream from Hoover Dam are not all in the same position as Las Vegas. Phoenix draws from the Central Arizona Project Canal, which moves Colorado River water across 336 miles of desert to the cities and farms of central Arizona. The CAP has already been delivering reduced allocations for years under the shortage tier system. When that threshold is crossed, the legal and political fight over California's allocation will be the most consequential water dispute the American West has seen. Mexico receives 1.5 million acre-feet annually under a 1944 treaty. At Deadpool, that delivery stops. The farms of northern Mexico's Mexicali Valley, which feed millions of people across both sides of the border, have no alternative source. The bathtub ring on Lake Mead's walls marks 160 feet of water that used to be there and isn't anymore. At the rate the lake has been declining, averaging roughly 6 to 7 feet per year over the past 2 decades, the distance to Deadpool is measured not in centuries, but in decades, possibly less, depending on what the Rockies produce in the winters ahead and whether the 7 states find a way to use less water than the 1922 compact entitles them to take. Because Lake Mead is ultimately a symptom. The real question is whether the American Southwest can adapt to a Colorado River that may never again provide the water it did in the 20th century.